This is Robert Clotworthy, the narrator of The Curse of Oak Island, and I have a question for you. Could it be that you are listening to The Curse of Oak Island and Beyond live stream?
This is a top pocket find, mate, for sure.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Curse of Oak Island and Beyond live stream. I am your host, Jeff Freeman, and today is still daylight, I'm being joined by Alessandra, Nadudvari, and Burns. And we are going to be having a great guest coming on in just a few minutes, but I wanted to say welcome and thank you for being my co-host today.
Hello.
There you go.
Happy to be back.
Yeah, I know. I love having you back, Alessandra. It's really fun to have you on as a co-host because you always have such great insights and all the research and everything that you do. And of course, Tom Burns, he's becoming a regular on this, and I really appreciate Tom so very much for all of his insights. And he's a great researcher as well. So I just really appreciate having you guys on today. And we have our very special guest, and I'm not going to waste any time with this. I just wanted to have us come on first. And then I wanted to introduce our very special Terry. Thank you for being on the show today with us.
My pleasure.
So I know that, sir, that you are a Oak Island researcher, historian. You actually, and I guess you still work as a senior scientist with ocean acoustics. Tell us a little bit about that. What is ocean acoustics?
Well, the sound in the ocean is very complex, much more so than sound in the air. So one of the big issues of modern times is the pollution of sound in the ocean. And marine life, such as whales and dolphins, are under a lot of stress due to the amount of sound in the ocean today. So as a result of that, there are regulations. So if anybody is out there making sound, whether it's searching for oil and gas with a seismic array, or building a pier with pile driving, like you've seen on Oak Island, all of this can make a lot of noise. So there's regulations as to anybody making that kind of noise has to show that mitigation is being done to prevent harm to marine life. And usually my main job day in and day out is running computer models for our clients of the sound that they're planning to make, and then figuring out, how far that sound would go, how loud it would be at various distances from the source, and what they can do to then make sure that no marine life would be harmed by their project.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So would that just be for construction along the shorelines, Terry, or would that also include marine vessels?
Yeah, definitely vessels. It's mostly vessels. Yeah, vessels, and also surveys. So seismic surveys, for example, use very loud sound sources, but also, there are other types of sonars that are used to study the bottom of the ocean, and anything that makes a sound, really. We even have military contracts as well for similar reasons.
So are there monitors sort of at sea that keep an eye on that sort of thing, or how is it monitored?
It's monitored on a case-by-case basis. So if somebody is doing a project that's making sound, then a lot of times our company is actually contracted to go out and monitor what they're doing to then report back on how well they did at implementing the mitigation procedures.
Wow. Now, something that's brought up a question for me. Sound travels on, through the air at a certain speed. Does it travel in water at a same speed, or slower, faster? How does that work?
It's faster. In general, the denser the medium, the faster the speed of sound.
Okay. Yeah.
In air, sound travels at about 343 meters per second, whereas in the water, it's roughly around 1,500 meters per second.
Wow.
So about 5 times faster.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
And would that sound carry further?
Usually it does, yeah. It usually carries further. So you can do this yourself. If you're in a swimming pool or in a lake, you've got 2 rocks in your hands, just click them together while you're above the water, and then duck yourself underwater and click the same rocks together. They sound way louder.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, see, we're getting an education on something we didn't even expect today, isn't it?
It's interesting, though.
Oh, it's absolutely interesting. And and you think about that is something that would be needed because
in fact,
you don't want to.
on distances, whales can communicate for thousands of kilometers by making
amazing.
sounds underwater.
That truly is amazing. Somebody, Barbara Duncan asked the question: saltwater versus freshwater. Does that make a difference?
It does. It does make a difference. It's a smaller difference. It's 30% or something like that.
Wow.
No,
Somebody said.
Now, would that be because the saltwater is the saltwater denser, or?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. That's very interesting. It really is. And like I said, it would make sense because you definitely don't want to be putting sounds out there, just like we don't want to do things that are harmful, above ground or above, water, out of the water to animals or whatever. But the same thing goes down there. And I guess people would have tendency to not be as concerned because, oh, you're underwater, it's not going to affect anything, right? So that's pretty amazing.
Well, it's even worse than that, Jeff, because let's face it, there's a lot of money to be made in a lot of these projects, right? And so historically, over the 20th and 21st centuries, it took a lot of convincing to get the people who are, making a profit out of these activities to get them to, have laws in place that would curtail the dangerous activities. So we've come a long way. It's 100 years ago, or even 50 years ago, the laws just were not in place, and so now they are. So the situation's improving every day.
Well, somebody said I have an echo. Oh, I don't know how that came about. We'll see if we can't get that corrected here. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll just be quiet. I'm going to ask one more question, and I'll just be quiet and let
That's
Terry.
not going to happen.
Gee, thanks, Tom. You know me too well already, don't you? So basically, I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background. We know that you're a researcher, an Oak Island researcher, and we know a historian, and you know an awful lot about the Portuguese and their original contact in the Americas, in North America, I should say. What got you started in all this? Where did that interest come from?
Well, my background is French Acadian on my father's side, and it's actually Ukrainian on my mother's side. I mean, Ukraine is in the news now, but I have a lot of Ukrainian relatives in Manitoba and points west from there. But on my father's side, Acadians have quite a unique history in Atlantic Canada and even Eastern North America. So as a young man, a young boy, I was drawn into a study of my Acadian history just because it was my life story, really. And I grew up in a French-speaking part of Nova Scotia, Acadian part of Nova Scotia, St. Mary's Bay. And so the Acadians were some of the first people to settle Nova Scotia. And I spent a lot of time investigating all of that. But it naturally led me to try to see, well, were there any even earlier attempts than the first French attempts to settle Nova Scotia? And so that's why I started delving into the Portuguese era, which was about roughly 100 years prior to the French era in Nova Scotia.
Wow. Then that would put it about what year do you think to start with?
Well, the first Portuguese explorers came to Atlantic Canada around 1500.
Oh, wow.
And then for the next, well, really from that point on, they just kept coming, not continually, but at different points there, an expedition would be mounted to come and explore Atlantic Canada and do some mapping. I mean, the maps that were made by the Portuguese cartographers of that period are usually they're the first ones, in the world to show the increasing levels of detail features along the coast that were mapped, and not even just along the coast. It's really quite surprising how much the Portuguese did map at a very early date.
Wow. I'm sure, Alice. Go ahead, Alessandra. I think you have a question or start things off. Go ahead.
Yes. I made a list of the Portuguese explorers who came this way. So in 1498, a man called João Fernandes Labrador came to presumably Newfoundland and what is now Labrador. And I think Labrador is even named after him. So his last name was Fernandes, but Labrador means farmer or small landowner. he was from Terceira in the Azores, where he must have owned land, and then he sailed to Newfoundland and explored it. And I think that the mark that he left on this place was his name. So Labrador is probably named after him.
Yeah, I can talk a little about that if
Yeah,
you like.
please.
Please do.
So Labrador is a title that was, like you said, he owned farming estates on Terceira Island. It didn't mean that he was out there with his hoe and his oxen. These were wealthy people, right? They had tenant farmers. They might have had like several hundred tenant farmers working their land, but so it gave them the ability to do bigger things, and so these Labradors would take up land in the New World as a way of expanding their family's fortune, really. In this case, the Labrador whose name has been given to Labrador was on an expedition with a group of other explorers. It wasn't his own expedition. And they went up to Greenland, and he was the first one to spot land. Like after they'd been sailing for quite a few weeks and not seeing anything, early one morning he spotted land. And so they named the land after him. And originally it was Greenland that they saw, but over the years, people got mixed up as to what land was what. And so the coast of Labrador, which, the Norse, a few centuries before that, had called that Helluland and Markland. But then it became Labrador in later centuries because people associated that region with his documented discovery of what in fact was Greenland, but people lost track of what land was what, because they didn't have satellites, and Google Earth. Even the mapping was extremely crude, so it was easy to get confused. No.
Terry, I read that this man was part of a syndicate based in Bristol, the port of Bristol in what is now UK. What kind of dealings did the Portuguese have with the English?
Well, they were pretty tight, actually, and especially with Bristol. There's a lot of documentation about joint expeditions and adventures of that sort, like commercial ventures where the Bristol merchants would put up money. They were looking for new cod lands. I think one of the problems was the Bristol fishermen had been fishing off Iceland for quite a few years, and it was becoming too crowded. They had to look for other areas to find the cod. So that was one of the reasons they were going further afield and ended up on the Grand Banks, eventually off of Newfoundland. Right.
And it was also the Basque fishermen that sailed to the Grand Banks on a regular basis, didn't they? Basque?
Yes. The Basques were very active. The Basques are most known for whaling. They had a great success at harvesting whales in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And there's a really great museum in Red Bay, Labrador, if anybody has a chance to get up there, that really portrays the Basque period in a very easy to comprehend way. Like some great exhibits in that museum. I really recommend it.
Mm-hmm. And wasn't the reason for this big interest in cod the fact that the church decreed that everybody had to eat fish on Fridays, and there just wasn't enough fish in Europe to go around, so they had to go find these elsewhere?
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay. I just read that many years ago, and it's stuck in my memory, but I didn't know if it was accurate.
It is.
Okay. All right. So I know that Portugal and Spain competed over the newly discovered lands in North America, and there was a treaty that they signed in 1494, the Treaty of Tordesillas. I don't know if I'm saying it right.
I think
And
you are.
they decided that there was a dividing line, like a meridian, I think 1,800 miles west of Cape Verde Islands. Anything that was west of that meridian would belong to Spain, and anything east of the meridian would belong to Portugal.
Mhm.
So what is also interesting is that the year before Fernandez, Labrador, came to Newfoundland, John Cabot beat him to it. So John Cabot came in 1496, 1497, and Labrador came in 1498. And there was maybe a dispute who was here first. And it was John Cabot's arrival and discovery that gave England the claim to fame that, North America was theirs and not Portuguese or Spanish.
Well, yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that. I mean, there's a chance that Labrador was even part of the trip that Cabot was on as well. They were.
Oh,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Cabot sailed with Labrador.
The other way around, yeah, possibly. I mean, because he was on other trips with that Bristol group. I mean, Cabot was part of the Bristol group, so they were on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they didn't know what they were going to find, right? So they were making exploratory trips out there just to. I mean, if they could find like gold or something like that, that would be the main thing. But cod was good as well, or whatever else, whatever other resources they could identify that could be economically harvested, then that, they had to report on it. And but of course, that was a period of time, like under Henry VII of England, and then later under Henry VIII. England was in turmoil, and it really dropped the ball in terms of North American activities. So. And to an extent, Portugal did as well, because the things that were going on under the Portuguese flag were also fairly minor compared to what they were doing in Africa and the Far East. It was sort of a sideline for them. They were almost completely occupied with those other areas because that's where the money was. So they really didn't find too much in Atlantic Canada to justify a big expenditure of colonization or exploitation. And I know we're going to talk about Fernandez in a few minutes, and so there's a lot more to say about Fagundes. I mean to say, sorry, Fagundes on that score, but I don't want to jump the gun too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely so when you talk about them coming over and making contact, I mean these guys would have made contact with First Nations people here as well, correct?
Yes.
I mean, about that same time, if we're talking 1498, Alessandra, is that what you said initially? To come to.
So John Cabot, 1497, and then Joao Fernandez Labrador a year after, but 1498. But as Terry has pointed out, those two gentlemen might have even been on the same ship or
the
same expedition.
Yeah, on the same fleet.
Got left on the same boat.
Yeah.
So that 1500 era, or that in that 1490 era, would that have been primarily around Newfoundland, Labrador, or would they have been down into the Maritimes around that time as well?
Well, the Bristol expeditions were in the northern part, like of the Gulf and Labrador and that area. There's no evidence that the Bristol and Newfoundland. There's no evidence that the Bristol group went further south, but out of Portugal itself and Terceira, yeah, they were exploring the Bay of Fundy and the coast of Nova Scotia and Cape Breton Island into the 1520s for sure.
Oh, that early, okay, yeah. Because the earliest map I could find, at least, doing my limited research, is around 1558. That would kind of show the south shore of Nova Scotia and the Bay of Fundy. So they were there even earlier than that then.
Yes, although not too much. The earliest map that really does show the Bay of Fundy is 1554. But the expeditions upon which that map was based probably took place a few years before that date. That's just the earliest date that's survived.
That's the date on the map, not necessarily the date they were here.
Right. The date the map was made. But, in those days, map makers didn't actually go out in the field that much. they relied on reports that were coming in, and sometimes they'd be rough sketches, but more often they'd just be like written out, longhand, like we went here, we did this, we saw that. And so the cartographer back at home in Portugal or Lisbon had the task of translating the textual records and maybe a few sketches into a cartographic product.
That would be quite a trick to use somebody else's description to create your own map.
Which is why historical maps are so unreliable, and it's like fictional. Like, you just can't believe, well, how did they get this so wrong? But it wasn't easy. Like, we would probably not do any better.
That's amazing.
Well,
Yeah,
on those early maps, I believe Newfoundland and Brazil are shown as being east of the dividing line, even though in reality, neither Newfoundland nor Brazil stick out that far. So yes, the map was off, but the Portuguese said, hey, well, look, this land, it's east of the line, so it's ours.
Yeah, I think Brazil might have a bit of on the right side of the line for Portugal. But yeah, certainly Newfoundland doesn't really either. But the thing was, Spain was also very occupied. In Spain's case, yes, it was the New World. The Mexico and northern South America, and even up into the west coast of what's now the United States. So Spain really didn't have the time or energy to bother with Atlantic Canada either. So Portugal's the one that did the most in the 1500s. But it wasn't their main focus.
Mm-hmm. Terry, can you tell us what a portolan map is?
Well, those were maps that were used initially in the Mediterranean by sailors to, plan out where they were going to go. They were the best maps in cartographic history at that point in time. They're mostly talking the 1400s for the portolands. So they were good for their day, but they don't stand up to modern standards for sure. And as cartography improved over the years, by the time of Champlain in the 1600s, we had the first real approximation to modern cartography.
I can't imagine making a map, quite honestly. That had to be, especially from a ship. I mean,
Jeff,
it's amazing.
I'm sorry, Jeff, can you pull up the map that I sent to you?
Yes.
It's a map from 1504 by Pedro Reynel, and it's supposedly Newfoundland and Cape Breton.
Are you talking about this one?
No.
Oh, I got the wrong one. All right, let me see if I can.
No, it's a map. It looks a little green. The land.
The one that shows Overton? No, not that one either. Let's see. I'm sorry, I should have had this all ready for you. That's not it either. I'm trying to see.
So Terry, when you mentioned Samuel de Champlain, I read that he had a Portuguese interpreter among his crew.
Oh yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, his name was Mateus da Costa.
Oh, da Costa,
yeah. Yeah, he worked as an interpreter for Samuel de Champlain in the 1600s. So the Portuguese, some of them stayed in Canada, for the next 200 years. There was another gentleman, Pedro da Silva, a mercenary who settled in Quebec, and he delivered mail in a canoe between Montreal and Quebec City. So he lived in the second half of the 1600s. So Pedro da Silva was like the first mailman.
Wow. In a canoe. That's pretty wild.
In a canoe, yes.
Yeah, the first guy you mentioned, Da Costa, I didn't know that's who you were talking about. Yeah, he was, there's several articles written about him. If you Google, there's some great articles. He was an interpreter. He was probably a black man, though, according to what most people are thinking. So although he may have been attached to Portugal, in terms of nationality, he probably may have been born in Africa even.
Okay. So Jeff, this is a portolan map from the early 1500s, and it was made by a Portuguese cartographer. In the top left corner, do you see that green land?
Mm-hmm.
So that's supposed to be Atlantic Canada, I believe, or at least bits of it.
Wow.
There's Newfoundland in there somewhere.
So if I can get pretty close here. Of course, I can't read any of this personally, but
No.
Well, you can, like the right there, the lowest thing on the map is Cape Razo, and that's what's now called Cape Race in Newfoundland. It's on the Avalon Peninsula.
oh wow.
Wow.
There are a few other names that you could pick out there as well. Maybe.
Wow. And when was this map I'm sorry, when was this map made? About what time?
1504.
Wow.
It's by Pedro Reynal. Or Reynal.
Now I see
So-
the cross over here. What is this? What
Yeah.
flag is this?
Yeah, that looks like a nice Portuguese cross. And that blue symbol with the 5 white dots, is that the symbol of Portugal too, Terry?
Oh,
That's
okay.
correct, yes.
Okay.
Wow. Interesting. I wonder what they're depicting with these little red and blue little circles or ovals they've got all along here. I wonder what that's supposed to depict. I need a legend on this thing. Pardon me?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, people often wonder. Like, usually the colored in ones were some point of interest, but it's hard to imagine at this point in history
I don't think there's
what they were interested in highlighting those islands for. What you have to realize too is people in those days referred to quote unquote islands as places of interest, right? So they weren't necessarily, if something in the historical record from way back then is referred to the island of so-and-so, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was totally surrounded by water. It was the spot in the geography where something happened or someone had claimed it or whatever interest there was. So you've got to be careful. Not everything that's called an island really is surrounded on all sides by water. But it often was drawn that way on the map, which is why Newfoundland today, which we know is basically one big island, back in those days, every little cape was its own island on their maps, and especially some of the maps. This one isn't so bad, but quite a few of them are, where Newfoundland is like an archipelago of 1,000 islands, because that's just how they drew it, like a little cove or a little cape that they went to visit. Then they draw it as an island, and that's again because the cartographers back in Lisbon or wherever were creating maps from handwritten descriptions that they would get from the people who were there. So they just had to make up most of it to
that's amazing.
Product. Yeah.
Hard enough, like I was saying earlier.
Taking that literally, like it was meant to capture the information in a graphical form, but not to be interpreted as the way we would use Google Maps today.
Right. That's amazing.
What about all those crisscrossing lines on the map? What are they for?
Yeah, that's part of what you would use for navigation. So that, I mean, today when people go out on a voyage, they usually take a map and draw lines on it where they want to go. And then at the end of the voyage, they throw the map away. Well, the maps were too expensive in those days to draw lines on the map and for your voyage and then throw the map away at the end. So cartographers kind of drew quite a lot of lines, and then mariners could basically use the line that was closest to where they were going, so they wouldn't have to actually, deface the map in order to plot their course. So they don't really represent anything of particular relevance in the real world. They're like imaginary lines to help the navigators plot their course.
Thank you.
That's so amazing. It truly is how they figured all this stuff out back then without having, like you said, or now we've got Google Maps. I can jump out on Google Earth and pull up whatever I want. and I can see the coastline and all this, but it's just amazing that they were able to do this and then be able to chart it as even as crudely as it is. And yes, it's not to scale quite often or whatever, but still they did a great job with this, quite honestly.
It's true. And even if you look at Spain and France and even the British Isles, they're not that bad.
No,
pretty well drawn,
yeah. But you got to realize that the latitude and longitude of each of those points was laboriously calculated by people who were studying, the transits of the stars and using astronomy to obtain that information.
And again, that's fascinating.
When you were on a ship at sea, those methods were much harder, if not impossible. Latitude wasn't so bad. You could get a pretty good latitude on a ship at sea, but longitude in those days was virtually impossible to get on a ship at sea with any degree of accuracy. And even on the land, once you got to the other side, the only real way of getting longitude accurately was to have measurements of something like an eclipse of the moon or an occultation of the moon that you could compare back with the similar observation that was made back in the home territory. So, that was an extremely difficult process to go through.
I think the measurement of longitude wasn't possible until there was an accurate clock invented.
Well, at sea, that's true. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, you could still do something like if it was a lunar eclipse or in later years when they had telescopes, the transits of the moons of Jupiter. That was only in later years, like in the late 1600s, when astronomy had advanced to the point where they actually knew this stuff.
So was there any particular baseline that they would use to start their travel? Like, let's say the equator or whatever, but was there any sort of a base that they would start from for their travels?
Yeah. Sometimes there was a point in the Azores that was used as a prime meridian, or also Madeira Islands. It was sort of it made a longitude that you could reference from, because they would also sort of guess at how far the ship has traveled, by dead reckoning, and use that as the basis of a longitude estimate. But that was really the main way that they estimated longitude, but it's pretty tricky to have any accuracy that way.
It'd be pretty impressive to set out to sea. You're going to travel thousands of miles for weeks and months based on somebody's best guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
As you can imagine, if anyone was planning to come to North America from Europe, they had to be well supplied, right? And so they would try to make sure they stopped in someplace like the Azores or the Madeiras as their last point, to stock up and make sure all their fresh water supplies and all their food supplies were as topped up as possible. They wouldn't fill up in Lisbon and then go right by the Madeiras and not stop. That would be crazy. No one would do that. So therefore, it only made sense for that port to be kind of the prime meridian. And so from that point on, you would be using dead reckoning or other methods to estimate your longitude.
Wow. That's very interesting. I keep looking at this map. I'm glad I finally found it. Alessandra, you did send it quite a while ago, and I stumbled around, but this is truly fascinating. So to put this all together. So, we talk, I've seen a couple of the people, there was somebody, a robot was talking about the HO stone, and how it had the 4 dots or whatever on it.
Dots, yes.
Yeah. And I don't have a picture of it here, I don't think, but
I can pull it up easy enough.
Oh, okay. Is that pretty much, is that reminiscent of something that would be considered Portuguese then, or?
Not really. I mean, it could be. It's really not diagnostic.
Right.
So when the Portuguese would arrive or settle or lay claim to a place, were there any particular identifying marks or markers that they might leave behind?
Well, they certainly did when they were laying claim to it. There's something called a Pedro cross that they customarily would use as sort of a monument, like a land claim monument, essentially. And there's many examples of those in Africa, especially. I've visited a few of them there. None have been definitely identified in North America, although Probably the closest one is some remark that Champlain made about something that was found near Parsborough, which was a wooden cross. But by the time Champlain got there in 1604, he said it had long been rotten. There was virtually nothing left of it, but he could still identify it as the mark of a Christian people, I think is how he put it. So in all likelihood, that was a Portuguese Pedro cross that had been left there maybe 50 years before. In our climate here in Nova Scotia, if untreated wood is left out in the open, in about 50 years, you can still make out an outline of it, but there's very little left. Like, it's pretty much all rotted away. So that, plus or minus, I would say maybe 50 years before, in the 1550s, that cross could have been set up.
So they would have been using primarily wood as their marking.
Not normally, no. Normally, like in Africa, it's all stone and iron even. But none of those have been found in North America.
Oh, okay. What about something like the Overton Stone? What type of marking would that indicate, if it even is Portuguese?
Well, it may be something equivalent. There were some cases where they did use an inscribed stone like the Overton Stone instead of an actual Pedro cross. I have some examples of that I can show from Africa.
Okay.
And
yeah, please do.
Even I think it's the Azores. Yeah, there's one in the Azores, I believe, as well. That's quite similar. I might be able to pull up a photo here in a minute.
Now,
so this Overton Stone has the 4 dots around each. I mean, the carving. There are 4 dots around the cross.
Yes. Okay. So, well, let me see if I can pull up something about that. My stuff isn't all in one place here. It's in a number of different places. Let's see. What do I have here?
The Overton Stone really fascinates me because it does kind of seem, and I know when you were on the show, Terry, and you took the team out there to have a look at the Overton Stone, and you had described the tobacco leaf, the tobacco leaves, and I believe it was the feather, and then the actual cross itself. I'll bring it back up just briefly to show, but you were talking about it signifying a meeting, maybe. Now again, it's I don't know if it was ever figured out just how, it's hard to figure out just how old the carving is. Correct? Is that almost?
Well, it might be possible. That work has not yet been done, but I'm not ruling it out as something that could maybe come with more research on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely interesting nonetheless, but maybe talking about the meeting and of the two peoples together, and you would want to commemorate something like that. I mean, I think you would anyway. It just seems like, and this shows if it's true, if it's real, that shows the meeting or the commemoration of the meeting of two peoples together.
Yeah, I think it's more than just a meeting. So there's a fairly famous cartographer whose name is Ganong, and he wrote a book about all the different maps of Atlantic Canada, historical maps. Mm-hmm. And he has a chapter in there where he talks about these early Portuguese maps, and he points out that some of these earliest maps that were probably the information on them probably came from the voyages of Fagundes, that they include place names on those maps that are basically Micmac names that they must have obtained from talking to the Micmac. And, and he says in his analysis that there's no way this could happen unless they had some friendship, developed a friendship between the Portuguese and the Micmac, mm-hmm. which I think everybody, agrees is obvious. Like for the Portuguese to have done as well as they did in that period in the 1500s mm-hmm. in Nova Scotia, they would have had to have a friendship established between the Portuguese and the Micmac. And so then if that is the case, then it only makes sense that there would have been a friendship monument of some kind, to commemorate the friendship treaty or packed or whatever. And so it's complete speculation that this Overton Stone is evidence of that kind of a treaty, but it does make sense. Like in the absence of any better explanation, that's the one that makes the most sense to me.
And it's a fair amount. I would think it's probably, with the tools of the time, it's probably a fair amount of work to actually make those carvings in stone.
Yep.
So something fairly important, at least in
Right.
somebody's mind, must have been going on.
Right.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you couldn't
So-
back
so-
then. You couldn't take a selfie and send it out. You had to do something like this to commemorate.
No selfies.
No
I was
selfie.
just going to point out that Overton Stone is by Yarmouth, so that's the southwestern part of Nova Scotia, which means these Portuguese ships would have sailed around Nova Scotia, not just stay on the east side, Cape Breton and close to Newfoundland.
I don't
So
think
yeah,
they were in the Bay of Fundy. Yeah, I think they were in the Bay of Fundy for sure.
right.
Yeah, we definitely have evidence that they were in the Bay of Fundy. Yeah.
Wow. Is that now the Overton Stone? That's on private property, is it not?
I think it is, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think it is.
Yeah, it is. It is on private property. Yeah.
So I mean, is it? Do they allow people to come up and have a look at it, or is it?
No, they're quite firm about
Okay.
trying to keep people from visiting it.
Yeah. That's
It's kind of, the situation kind of evolved from the time that we first featured the stone on the Curse of Oak Island. It was a bit of a mix-up in that we didn't get their permission that we were supposed to get, and so the property owners were not very happy about all the publicity that happened, because they had spent many years trying to keep this secret, actually, because they didn't want the vandalism or damage just from visitors. So for years they tried to keep this thing completely off the grid, and all of a sudden it's on TV across
Around the world.
Yeah. So
Whoops.
they made it very clear to me that they didn't appreciate all that. And so I've been kind of backpedaling a little bit since then.
Well, I know when I was going up there this summer, I was hoping to see it, but okay, we definitely, I will not trespass, so to make something like that happen. So
Now the cross on the stone, it's got the flared ends on it.
Yes.
Is that something that the Portuguese did, or the sort of the knights of the Portuguese? Do you think, if it was them?
It's certain the style is certainly consistent with Portuguese iconography from the 1500s. Yeah, I mean, they're not the only people that use that style, but I would say it's more frequently identified with the Portuguese than anyone else by far. So it's not like 100% proof, but when you add up all these sort of maybes, there just are just too many of them, I think, to say, well, you have to dismiss it because it's all speculation. I mean, it is all speculation, but it isn't, the dots really do connect pretty heavily.
So that would really make it quite old then, yeah.
Can I go back to the Padreo stone, Padreo cross? On Oak Island, there is a stone which the late researcher Paul Wroclawski thought might have been a Padreo stone.
Yes.
What do you think about that, Terry? Jeff, I sent you a photo of it. It's just this long rectangular.
Yes, I believe I've got.
Yeah, Paul and I were great friends, and we worked quite closely together. He definitely sent me down there to check it out. It's I don't know, it's about 10 feet long, and it's about 6 inches thick, and then maybe 2 feet wide. So we're looking at one of the faces of it here, and you can see it's made of slate or something similar to slate. It might be a tuft. I'm not really sure. We did try to have it analyzed. We're not really sure where the stone originated from. Some of the analysis that we had done seemed to indicate that it might not have come from Nova Scotia, but then there's also places in Nova Scotia that might have been the source. It's really hard to know where this thing came from. But the problem I have with it is that it's a type of stone that doesn't weather very well. As you can see here, it's really suffered quite a lot from weathering, even though it's not in a super exposed location. And it's part of the McGuinness Foundation, and it's consistent with a doorway, like I want to say hearth, but that's not the word I'm looking for.
Lintel?
Well, on the ground though, something on the ground.
Okay, yeah.
Sort
the base of the fireplace.
No, on the front door, like a doorstep.
Oh, the front door. Okay, yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay. Threshold.
Oh, it's a threshold. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the word I'm thinking of. Yeah, threshold stone. So it's kind of consistent with that, and we know that back in that time period when New Englanders were coming up to Nova Scotia, like starting around 1760 and then onward, sometimes they did bring threshold stones with them. So, here the dots don't seem to connect in the right direction.
Okay.
Yeah, personally for me, I know Paul, I don't think ever really gave up on it. Like he thought he was pretty convinced, I think. But for one thing, if you set the stone upright, like it does kind of look like the right shape for a Pedro stone. If you look at some of the other Pedro stones around.
Yeah. But if it was upright.
If it was upright. The problem is if you set this stone upright, then the foliation of the layers of the slate or the tuft are vertically exposed to the oncoming rainfall, and that would just really tear the thing apart in no time. So it's similar to a fence post or whatever. If you don't put a topper on it, then the water just soaks in through the wood grain. Yeah, yep. And the rotting starts pretty quick. So it's a similar idea, but
with the freeze thaw too. It's not
that too. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So for me, the dots don't connect in the right direction on this one. I think it's just part of a threshold stone for the McGuinness Foundation, possibly with a local origin or possibly another non-local origin, but part of the New Englander colonization period from the 1760s onward, I would say. That's my best guess.
I never saw another stone like this on Oak Island.
No.
And I crawled all over the place.
Well, I've never seen another one in Nova Scotia either. I mean, it's...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it would... I've seen some places where you might be able to quarry some like this, but normally this type of stone is not quarried into blocks of this shape. That is completely unique in my experience. So yeah, there's a bit of a mystery around it. Like it doesn't make 100% sense.
So what did you say the shape of this was? You said it was about 6 inches thick and about 2 feet wide. How long is it?
About 10 feet.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Or maybe not quite that long. I mean, my memory might be exaggerating it slightly. It was definitely at least 6 feet. I mean, if I was to lie down next to it, I think it'd be longer than me.
Even if it was 6 feet, it would be a job to move.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's not light. We did tilt it over to look if there was anything on the other side, and it wasn't easy. It took a couple of people just to tilt.
I was going to say it took a little work to get that done, right?
Yeah, somebody had to put it there purposely. It certainly didn't float in there. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely part of the foundation. There's no question. The question is, well, did it have a life before the foundation?
Exactly.
We just have no way of knowing.
Right. Yeah. And did they borrow it? Yeah.
Because things get repurposed, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Oh, absolutely. That's very interesting. So, taking us a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about, your work and the times that you've come out to Oak Island, and you've done some research out there. They brought you out to have a look. You took the team out. I guess that was several seasons ago that you took the team out to see the Overton Stone. And then they brought you back, I think it was season 8, to have a look at the Stone Road, or was it early in season 9? But what was your impression of the Stone Road when they down the southeast corner of the swamp? As we saw the show. Most everybody watching has seen the show. But what was your impression when you saw that for the first time?
Well, it was season 8, and the way they did it is the same way they usually have me come over. They don't give me a whole lot of advanced information. They want me to kind of have a natural reaction without any preconceived notions, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I had no idea what to expect. I wasn't. Yeah, this is a good shot from the drone. That's me there on the left.
Yep.
I was literally blown away. Like it was like out of a fantasy. Like I couldn't imagine this having been uncovered in this part of Nova Scotia. Like it was totally out of place. Mm-hmm. Because when you get down there and look at it, it really does look like a early European style stone road. I mean, it doesn't look like any of the other explanations that have been thrown out. Well, it might have been this, might have been that. They were just filling in the swamp with random stones. Mm-hmm. No, it's very carefully constructed, and it did have a paving. Like most of the paving has not survived, but you can see a bit of it there, just in the top section. Much smaller stones that only cover part of the width, right at the top. Just no further up.
Oh, right up here
above that. Yeah, that right there. Yeah, that's a bunch of much smaller cobblestones that formed a paving. They most likely covered the whole lower part as well in their time, but this obviously has been subjected to a lot of natural erosion since the time it was built, and chances are the waves have washed over this in the past and probably washed away the smaller paving stones, except higher up on the road where they didn't quite finish the job.
That makes sense. Yeah.
But
so what would set this apart from other stone type roads or structures? You say European, Portuguese. What would set this apart?
I mean, the thing is, when road building, the history of road building in Nova Scotia doesn't really get started until the Acadian period. And the Acadians didn't do a whole lot of road building. They avoided road building. I mean, the historical documents are quite clear. I mean, the British, well, even the French, I mean, the governors in Port Royal were after the Acadians to build roads, and they very reluctantly did it. I mean, they just did the bare minimum, and they were always being told, like, this road's not good enough, you've got to improve it. No one would have said that about a road like this. It's just not the way they did it. I mean, the Acadians and the French, I mean, Louisbourg's different. I went up to Louisbourg, and you can find roads that are sort of like this at Louisbourg, but the French king spent a fortune building Louisbourg. Yeah, no expense was spared in Louisbourg. So you can't really compare Louisbourg to the rest of Nova Scotia. It's quite a unique example. But the thing about this road is the amount of labor involved and the amount of meticulous care that was put through to let's turn this off here, to make this road capable of carrying heavy loads. We just don't see this practically never in the early periods in Nova Scotia. Like the French, as I was saying, really the times they made roads, it was just for transporting their agricultural products, whether it's on carts or live cattle. The earliest roads were for the French to move their live cattle to a place where the ships could pick them up.
Right.
And so it doesn't take a lot. You just don't need, cattle are pretty robust. They don't need much more than the cow path, hence the name. But when the British came, it was all about military roads. And even then, they hired the Acadians, for the most part, to build the roads for them. But their military people were the engineers, and they, told them where to put them and how to do it. And so we can still find examples of how that was done, but we also have historical documents that explain it. And it's nothing like that. I mean, they still had boulders and stumps in the middle of the roads, even after they had called it done. And so when it came to later periods, like the early 1800s, where they wanted to actually have a regular stagecoach line between Halifax and Windsor, which is what we call our Highway 1, like it's the most advanced road in the province, they had to improve it a lot in the early 1800s before they could even run a stagecoach down it because it wasn't even suitable for four-wheeled carts. There were so many stumps and boulders in the middle of the number one highway in Nova Scotia. So that's why to find something built this well with cobble pavings in a swamp in Oak Island, the only explanation that I can see is that it happened when sea level was a lot lower. And
that's what I was going to ask.
Well before the French period and the British period for sure. And the only one before that is the Portuguese. So that's, it is speculation, but I just can't connect the dots any other way myself.
Right. And that's the thing you have to do. You got to put the facts together of what you can actually look at and, put those facts together and come up with the best, most logical explanation of a time period based upon those facts. That's really all you can do. Go ahead.
And not only that, if you go to Portugal and look at the old roads from the 1500s, they do look like this.
Right.
Mainly because they started out as Roman roads. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about Roman roads. But I mean, that's a whole nother telecast. Broadcast.
It really makes you wonder, though. I mean, if they were here in the 1500s and they built a structure like this, what in the world were they doing here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's the big question about Oak Island as a whole, right? I mean, everything you find on Oak Island, you wonder, well, why is that there? Why would they have done it that way, or why would they have done it at all? Like, this road is just one prime example. But I mean, the stone structure, like in this season, they're connecting the dots from this road up to the stone structure that Fred Nolan marked on his map as a possible tunnel entrance. Well, they pretty much figured out now that that was not a tunnel entrance, and so now they refer to that as the pine tar kiln. Now there may well have been pine tar kilns in Oak Island, but I do not think this was one of them. This is some kind of remains of a stone foundation of some kind, and but I don't personally see any evidence there of actual pine tar at all. It must have had some other purpose. Like, there definitely was evidence of a fire, and there's things that have been burnt there, but I think it's still quite a mystery as to what that structure was used for. And it's very intriguing that it kind of lines up. And now in this season, they've already talked about using ground penetrating radar, and they seem to have found some evidence of more stone, road-like stone under where you've got your red dashed line there. That apparently there may be more evidence of the stone road in that area under the soil. And so that hasn't been excavated yet. I'm not sure, in the coming episodes we might see something about that.
Yeah. Now, taking that one step further or back in this case, there was also when you were out on the island and during that I think you actually came back after you saw the stone roadway. They had you come back out, and you had talked to them about this particular picture here.
Yeah, that was this season, yeah.
Yeah, where it looked as though, and again, based upon the facts that you have, which is all you really can do, but you find these other stones, and this is where Tony Sampson was diving off of, I guess this was during season 8. He was diving out there and talked about seeing these like stone.
Yeah, well, Tony actually was quite a bit further to the left.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he didn't actually. That is right up on the main beach next to the swamp. But no, Tony was a bit further to the east on the shore. Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about these here, and it looked as though there were stones out here that maybe mentioned that this may have continued right on. Now, of course, what did Rick? I think Rick told us one time on the episode that the water level was raising about a foot every 100 years. Is that about right? In your estimation?
It is about right, yes.
Okay. So knowing that, this would have been dry ground, what, 600 years ago. This probably would have been dry ground, correct? Or they're very close to it.
Or close to the shoreline, yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Right. So if there was a wharf out here or something that would have to reach out to the deeper water, that would make sense that this might have connected at one time all the way through.
Yeah, but that was the whole point of what I presented this season. And if you look at those yellow dots, which I put those yellow dots in there based on looking at the aerial photos. I'm not sure if they were taken from an aircraft or if they're satellite photos. I just got them from Google Earth, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But since it says province of Nova Scotia and the copyright, I'm assuming they were actually aerial photos, because the province does fly aerial photography, like has some pretty good databases of that. So they're probably aerial photos, but I got them from Google Earth. And I just looked, on those photos, and if I saw a little dot, I put a yellow dot on it to make it highlight, stand out visually.
Right.
So I wasn't just making up those dots. I tried to be non-selective. I tried to put a yellow dot every single place that there was some kind of thing that looked like a boulder to my eye in the imagery. And so then after I did all that, you look and you see, like, these yellow dots don't seem to be randomly distributed. They look like they may have originally been lined up along that blue line and then pushed upward on the beach from erosion.
From storm erosion, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally speculation, but my only point was, because I had actually been asked, do you have any recommendations of what we should investigate this season? I think they had me on in the first episode of the season.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was what I was saying. Well, based upon my analysis of this imagery, I think you should check it out. Like, I don't know if there's anything there. I'm not saying I know there's something there, because I don't.
Right.
But it would be something to check, right? So so far, nothing has been shown on the show about having checked that area, but I really don't know if something will be coming up or not this season about that.
What's interesting is that the swage, which was an artifact inspected by Carmen Legg, he said that it was pre-1600s and it might have been as old as 1400s. So that swage that fell apart, and they showed it as two pieces, but it's actually two halves of the same swage. That's a very old tool for sharpening rock drills. So looking at this stone road, I wonder what kind of tools they would have needed to break up all those stones to even make this road. Could that swage have been part of the process?
Yeah, that's a good point. When I looked at the stones in the road, none of them really seemed to have been worked at all. Like,
so they're not split?
Some had split naturally, it seemed. It just maybe from heat, if a fire was made nearby or on them. I couldn't say for sure one way or the other, but the vast majority were rounded on every side, like as if they were just.
And they all seem, for lack of a better term, local stones, like beach stones or whatever.
Well, not beach stones, but more till stones. Like if people had been digging in the earth, whether to make a tunnel or whatever other reason they may have been digging in the earth, around there you would pull out like unbelievable numbers of stones. I mean, it's the same thing on my own property here just outside of Halifax. Like, you dig into glacial till, you basically get an unlimited number of boulders the size of watermelons.
Same thing here in New Brunswick. Yeah, if you dig a wheelbarrow full of dirt, it's going to be half rocks or more.
Yeah, that's something that Colin had mentioned that too. You said you guys grow a lot of big stones there all the time, quite a lot. Because that, you wonder about that too. And going back to the building of the stone road up here in the southeast corner of the swamp, this is not something that I think you kind of talked about this a little bit, was that this is not something that's going to be just thrown together quickly just to get something. This took a lot of man hours to build, and you're not going to go through all of that unless it is something that is truly really needed and going to be built and last a long time and hold up to the weights that are going to be it's going to be used for. So you're not going to just throw something like this together overnight. So
no,
so it's just interesting in that respect to me.
Yeah, and if the thing is, if this was made by Portuguese in the 1500s, back in those days, the Portuguese did use slaves quite a lot for projects, right? And if you were doing a big project, you would have a lot of slaves doing most of the work with just a few people, making sure they stayed in line, and maybe a military contingent to prevent slave rebellions or whatever. But the thing about having a slave workforce is the last thing you want is for them to become idle. So you do kind of need make work projects for them. So if this road was over-engineered, and I'm not saying it was, I don't really know, but some people have said it's over-engineered. That might have been a reason why it was over-engineered. If they weren't quite ready to complete some other project that they were planning to use the slaves for, they may have said, well, build a road like 3 times better than we really need just to keep them busy for another couple of months. It's certainly within the realm of possibility.
Mm-hmm. One of the folks asked the question, and I believe, let's see, this was Janet, I believe, asked the question, were the local people known for carving stones and making a carving in a stone, or was that purely a Portuguese or Spanish thing? I mean, were the locals known for doing things like that?
Are definitely known for making petroglyphs and carvings. We have a huge cultural resource heritage in Nova Scotia of Micmac petroglyphs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they definitely were. But the style is quite distinct as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you go up to Kejimkujik National Park, there's a preserve up there of Micmac petroglyphs, but it isn't the only place. I mean, there are other places around Nova Scotia that also have them.
Yeah, that's truly interesting because, and I know that's something that you've studied over the years, right? Not only up in this particular area, but you've kind of looked at petroglyphs or petroglyphs from different nations over the years, have you not?
Yes.
And studied them. Even Egyptian, actually. Have you looked into those as well, or?
Not a whole lot. I mean, there's one place just outside of Halifax in Bedford, and here's a shout out to Jack McNabb if he's on the call. I think he is. He found what looked like Egyptian hieroglyphs just outside of the town of Bedford in Nova Scotia back in the 70s, and he didn't really know what to make of them. But
wow.
When I started looking into them 10 or so years later, I found that they were a partial form of the cartouche for Cleopatra, and it wasn't complete. I mean, there were not all the letters were carved, but some of them were, and it was clear that that's what was being done. Somebody was carving the cartouche of Cleopatra. But so initially, I was pretty excited because I didn't know quite how to interpret that. But over the years of further investigation and trying to follow down every lead I could, I came to find out that the place where those initials were carved, well, for one thing, it's not the only thing there. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of other sort of little petroglyphs of different sorts. Usually it's just initials and dates, but other interesting things, like there's one of an elephant or a marijuana leaf or other stuff like in that same general vicinity. But it turns out that it was a favorite haunt for sailors from the base at Halifax. It's about an hour away, but it's a place they would go for recreation and picnics and on their days off. And there's no historical record of them actually carving stuff at that location, but there is a historical record of them basically taking time off there just to let loose. It's also, well, I could go on and on about that. It's another topic. But the other interesting thing is that around that time, when this was happening, there was a ship in the Halifax squadron called the HMS Cleopatra. And so for me, the dots kind of connect in that direction. The carving itself might date to the late 1880s when that ship was in Halifax as part of the British squadron.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Going back to the Stone Road, Ends of the Earth asked this question: was the swamp even there when the road was made, or was it a harbor or dry ground? What's your opinion? There's some that said, well, it used to be 2 islands. They filled it in with dirt after they sunk a ship in there, spoils from the money pit or whatever. What's your thoughts on all of that? And was this dry ground?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a very important question, Jeff. And I know this business of two islands just keeps coming up. The thing about sea level rise in this part of the world is that it is going up, not down. So the sea level was lower in ages past. And so it's looks like it's almost two islands now. It would have looked less like that in the past.
Right.
So there were not two islands in the past. There was definitely only one. There might be two islands in the future. Like maybe 200 years from now, there will be two islands. But that's a future thing, not a past thing. Okay. Now, having said that, where the swamp is now, there's a gravel berm on top of which the road has been placed that protects the swamp from the ocean waves right now. During storms, of course, as anybody in Nova Scotia will tell you, the waves are pretty big and they would overtop that road easily. And so the swamp would then collect driftwood of all different types that had come in, washed into the cove. A hurricane would throw it over the road into the swamp over the years. So that explains a lot of the wood that's found in the swamp. It's just being overthrown from the beach, driftwood overthrown from the beach by big storms. But if you go back in time, there's a good chance that stone berm wasn't there, and sea level was lower. These type of features in Nova Scotia are transitory. If you look at hundreds of years at a time, they do move around. They appear and they disappear. There's a big item in the news a few years ago up here at on the Eastern Shore. I think it was around Chesapeake somewhere, where a stone berm like this was being breached by sea level erosion, and the homeowners, who formerly had a freshwater barrachois, now suddenly we're faced with the saltwater invading, and they tried to get the government to do something about it. But the government scientists said, listen, in Nova Scotia, these are transitory features. You can't stop Mother Nature from moving these stone berms around. These beaches, they come and they go. It's just nothing you can do about it. It's nature. And so the same thing here on Oak Island. Like, there was a time when this beach wasn't there, when the stone berm was not there. And so the swamp would not have been there either, because it would just been exposed to the coast. So it wouldn't have been as contained. It would be part of the shoreline. It could have been a little, obviously as sea level rises, the moisture of the land increases.
Right.
And so it was probably drier, certainly drier than today. I mean, if you go there, like right now, if you literally went to Oak Island right now, what we refer to as a swamp would be a huge lake. It's totally underwater at this time of the year. At the height of the summer, it can dry up and become a swamp, but it's more of a intermittent lake now than anything else. But in years past, it wasn't like that. It would have been damp and moist, but not as swampy as a true swamp. I think at the time the road was built, it probably was too damp to pass heavy loads over it without the stone road, but you wouldn't have identified it necessarily as a swamp. It would have been more or less identified as just regular ground, a glacial till, but of not sufficient, a little too moist to rely on it for heavy loads.
Right. But it does make it in an ideal location because of its low spot right there, where you would have wanted to, if you wanted to have some sort of a dock or a wharf put in, that would be probably have been a great place for it. And it's very true too that you look at that now. If I remember it now, Karen Publicover was talking about this, but I believe that the area where the causeway is now, so between that portion of the island and the mainland, is not that deep of water right there. So at some point, Oak Island would have been a peninsula rather than an island at some point, I would imagine.
That's going back a few hundred years. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Probably about 500 years, give or take. But actually, if you could bring up that image that you had on earlier showing, my purple lines and the yellow.
Okay, yep, I'll grab that one.
Because you just brought up a great point, which I think should be emphasized. And that is, if you're going to have a dock, you would want it to access the deepest water available. And right where your cursor is, from what I could tell, that was a lot deeper water, closer to shore than just about anywhere else, except on the exposed side. I mean, there's two advantages here. Number one, it's sheltered. It's not facing the main brunt of the waves coming in from the Atlantic. So that's one advantage. And number two, the water is fairly deep there, as compared to, let's say, either to the left or to the right of that place, where you have to go out further from the shoreline to get to the deeper water. Now, I'm not referring to necessarily the current coastline. I'm taking it back 400 or 500 years, what the coastline would have looked like then. The deeper water would have been close to that coastline, much closer to that coastline than other areas nearby. So that's another motivation for why would a wharf have been put in exactly here as opposed to somewhere else.
Right. And then you think about too, we've talked about this on the regular show when we've discussed, if you bring a galleon in or a larger ship, you're going to anchor it out. It's not going to be pulled up this close. So it's going to be anchored out a ways. You're going to get your smaller boats out, your landing craft or whatever you want to name that particular boat. You're going to get those out, and then you're going to transport people and cargo either to or from the beach in that smaller boat. And then be able to, if you had a wharf built right along here, you'd be able to come up into steeper water and then tie off and unload.
That certainly was the way it was done most of the time. But if you had really heavy loads, you would try to avoid doing it that way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If you had really heavy loads, you would want to get your big ship tied up to the dock. You may only have like an hour or so at every high tide when the water was deep enough to do it. So you would try to time things so you could get your heavy loads done at the dock and then move offshore before the tide ran out. It's
which I guess would make sense as to why you'd want to build a wharf or dock that far from shore.
Yeah,
and not just go straight out where the shortest distance, right? They took a long route out there to get to deeper water for a good reason.
Exactly. And the other thing too, while we're on the topic, if you look at maybe bring up the image before this one, that was a close-up of the stone road itself.
Oh, okay. Hang on just a second. Let me, let's do this. I hate to flip through them real fast. It gets everybody kind of nauseous if I don't. Okay, here we go. Try that. All right.
Yeah. So you can see like where I'm standing there on the left in the blue. There, if you go to the road, they're just above my head. There seems to be a bit of a wing, a widening out, like exactly right there. And so, what's that doing there? I mean, why doesn't the road just come straight along the direction it looks like it's heading? Why would it broaden out into a wing there? And so, one of the points I made on the program is that if you are taking goods on and off a ship, and you're not going to want to necessarily block the path with things that you unload. If your oxen are already carrying one load and you're trying to get the ship unloaded in time for the tide to change, you would want sort of a staging area off to one side where you could pile stuff and not have it be right in the track. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's sort of like a siding, I guess is what I'm saying. It looks to me like that is the function of that widened area. It could have functioned as a siding for having goods piled there and not block the main thoroughfare.
That's interesting. I noticed that, but I never really thought about why it was there. That's very interesting. That now that you point that out, it makes total sense.
Well, what were they offloading? What were they or unloading from the ship?
It's a great question. I honestly have no idea.
That's the $10 million question right there. Now, people have talked about, I know, and I may be completely out in left field with this question, but people have talked about the Portuguese. Okay, so the Portuguese are there, and then we know that there was Portuguese Templars. Do you think there were Portuguese Templars that were coming over here, or just Portuguese in general, not simply Templar?
Right. Okay. So the thing is, a lot of people have read a lot of information or seen a lot of TV about the Templars. I mean, they are a fascinating group in history. You know, quite a lot of romantic stories swirling around them. And so, as most people know, the Knights of the Temple were outlawed, excommunicated, and the organization was disbanded. What was it, 1310 or something like that, 1311?
1312.
Okay, 1312. So what happened is that in Portugal, the Templars owned a lot of real estate, and they had a lot of members, you know, in the Knights. There were a lot of people employed, if you want to put it that way, by that organization. And so the King of Portugal had a bright idea. He said, well, listen, rather than throw all these people out of work and have all this wonderful, you know, real estate go back to the Pope, the Pope's a good buddy of mine. I'm going to ask him. I say, listen, I've got an idea. Why don't you let me take over all of the Templar assets in Portugal and, you know, and all the personnel? And so he managed to talk him into it. So the King of Portugal basically took over all of the Templar assets and Templar personnel. And he formed a new organization called the Knights of Christ. The Knights of Christ, even though they had all of the Templar, you know, real estate and most of the Templar personnel, was a completely and 100% different organization than the Knights Templar. The Knights of Christ was an arm of the Portuguese crown. He was the head of it, and they had no autonomy at all. They served the King of Portugal at his pleasure, and yes, he used them for lots of different purposes. They did go on expeditions wherever the Portuguese went. The Knights of Christ were involved. They were part of the resource that was available to, you know, crown-funded expeditions. So yes, probably, very likely, there were Knights of Christ involved in anything the Portuguese did in Nova Scotia. Every reason to think that would be true. But to then say, oh, wow, let's say the Templars were here,
right,
does not connect. They're two completely different things.
Yeah,
So
and that's good. Go ahead, Tom. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, so when you mentioned the possible military connection, I was doing some research, and there's a stone or a grave marker that's thought to be potentially connected to the Portuguese up around Windsor.
Yeah, we called it the Mariette Stone. There was a farmer in Ardoise, which is just outside of Windsor, whose name was Mariette, and he did find this inscribed stone on his property. Now, even though he was a farmer, he also had a gold mine on his property, and so I mean, you can find this on the net. It's you can Google it.
That's what I was just trying to do. I was just trying to find it.
Ardoise stone. Usually, it's referred to as the Ardoise stone or the Loomer stone, because Loomer was just about the only historian who wrote about it. That's how I first discovered it. I happened to be reading Loomer's history book of Windsor, Nova Scotia, and with one paragraph about this mysterious stone that had the date of 1558 on it, and the words in Latin, a Latin inscription, "Here lies C. Manulis," 1558 in Roman letters, Roman numerals, and there was a shield and a sword, as well as a skull and crossbones and a big prominent arrow, all carved on a piece of slate. But see, Ardoise is all about slate. In fact, Ardoise itself is the French word for slate. So, yeah, and so I couldn't understand it. Why had I never heard of this before? This is a big deal. You know, a grave marker with a name and a date on it as early as 1558, that is big news. You know, there aren't any other ones. In fact, the earliest grave marker in both the Americas with a name and a date on it, of European origin, I mean, is one in Mexico City that dates to 1520. So this one, if it's, you know, legitimized, would be the second oldest one in all of the Americas. And here we had found it in Ardwas. So anyway, Mariette, when he found it, while his gold mine was being expanded, he, I don't know if he found it personally or one of his diggers brought it to his attention, but he thought, well, this must be important. So he took it to Windsor to have a historian, expert look at it. And as often happens with these sorts of things, the guy accused him of making it himself and trying to pull a fast one on the academic.
Okay, that old argument. Yeah. Oh, you made it.
That's right.
You picked a Portuguese stone.
That's right. So, as you can imagine, a crusty old miner and farmer didn't take kindly to being accused of being a liar when he was just trying to do the academic community, give them their due and get their assistance in this. So he said, fine, if that's what you think, you won't hear from me again. So he went home and he literally never told anyone else about it. Like it remained in the family for generations, and no one talked about it because no one wanted to be accused of faking it, except for when Loomer put it in his history book, and in there he said it's safe in private hands, and that's just really about all he said.
How did you spell that, Marietta or Mariette?
Mariette, yeah, Mariette.
How's that spelled?
2 T's. Yeah, you might not find too much on it in that terminology, but under Loomer stone or Ardwas stone.
Lumm.
I think you may have the picture, Jeff. I sent it to you earlier.
Oh, is that the one you sent me? Sorry.
So yeah, after reading about it and checking around for a few people, I realized, okay, I kind of
that's
the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So as you can see, like it's pretty impressive, and it obviously has weathering on it, and that little corner on the far right that's lighter colored, a chip,
It's been chipped off, yeah.
Chipped off. Most likely happened when the stone was dug out of the ground, by the miners. They probably chipped a piece off before they realized it was important, just by hitting it with their pick or whatever. But you can see the fresh stone that chip exposed, and the inside of all the lettering has clearly weathered far more than that, right? It's obviously been sitting out in the weather for quite some time. Like slate like this does not weather quickly, but the weathering inside the inscription is definitely there. So it had to have been exposed to the weather for a lot of years. I couldn't venture to say exactly how many, but it wasn't something somebody carved like in 1886 when Mariette first brought it to the attention. It had obviously been exposed to weathering for many years prior to that. So
there's some interesting markings right here.
Alpha and Omega at the top.
There's actually several letters. If you use a very high-powered scanner, you can make out a whole word there. I'm not going to get into that today.
No, but for me, it was just interesting. It just sort of adds a little bit of extra fuel to the fire that the Portuguese were there.
Was the stone nailed to something?
That's what I was just going to say. There's a hole in it, and the only reason you do that generally is to hang it up on something or keep it.
Well, there's two things there. Yeah, yes, the hole was definitely put in, and the weathering on the inside of the hole is just as much as on the weathering as the inscription. And so, yes, it would have been attached to a tree or something like that. But the way I go with this is that if this really was somebody who died and a grave marker had to be placed over his grave in 1558 in the middle of the woods, they probably were in a rush, right? They probably didn't live there on any kind of a permanent basis. Chances are, since this was found on a literal gold mine, they were probably there looking for gold. I mean, the way that gold mines are found in Nova Scotia in the 1800s, they found full gold lying on the ground. Like you would be just hiking in the woods and you'd see a piece of gold lying on the ground as part of a piece of quartz, would have a vein of gold in it. And so you'd then follow these drift gold samples and try to find the mother lode. Well, it turns out that there was a mother lode right at this location. So people had probably been finding evidence of gold. The Micmac may well have guided them to this location. And so they, in all likelihood, these people in 1558 were there to look for gold and collect gold and assess the gold potential of this spot. And somebody died. Like, how did they die? I don't know. They could have fallen and hit their head. It could have been
this poor guy might have died at a gold mine.
Yeah.
And so chances are they were not going to be spending a lot of time there, but they needed to bury him. They would have probably dug a hole and buried him in it. And then they wanted to put this marker. So they probably just nailed it to a nearby tree. And that's what the arrow probably indicates is his grave is actually over there. They wouldn't have...
It's a marker, not a gravestone then. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a marker. They wouldn't have dug right under the tree because there's too many roots, right? You would have dug just off to the side.
Right.
So that's how it does indicate a burial from 1558 and in all likelihood Portuguese.
About that coat of arms?
That's what I was looking at. This here,
on the shield, has anybody tried to identify it and link it to an existing family?
Yeah, I definitely have. And it's not a coat of arms that can be identified. Like the coat of arms from that period were far more complex. Like no one had a coat of arms that simple. So it's not a coat of arms. I don't want to get into a whole study of this because we could easily have several episodes. Like, believe me, I have spent hundreds of hours.
I was looking at the feathers on the arrow, and they reminded me of the feathers on the tobacco leaf, or the shape of the tobacco leaf on the Overton Stone.
Yeah. There's a lot to say about this stone. Believe me.
Okay.
And, we could have like multiple programs on this stone alone.
Okay, it's a real stone, I guess. My question, it was a real stone anyway.
Yeah, I'm super pumped about this stone. Let me put it that way. And I've brought it to the attention of experts. I've yet to find an expert who will say that they're on board with it. Like most of them say, well, I kind of doubt it, or I really doubt it, or I'm absolutely positive it's not real. So various levels, various degrees of incredulity. And the thing is, everyone who says that has a reason. They'll say, I don't think it's real because of this reason, or I think it's probably fake because of this reason. But for each of those reasons, when I've gone back and investigated and tried to get to the bottom of whether that's a valid reason to dismiss this stone, I've found that no, it isn't a valid reason. In fact, most of the time, it turns out when you really analyze it to be an even bigger reason to think it's genuine. So again, like I said, we could go on for hours about this stuff. Let's just leave it there.
Yeah. Just go ahead.
Sorry, could this man, C. Manulis, could he have been part of the Fagundes colony?
Not in 1558, no.
That was too late?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Fagundes began his work in the Maritimes in 1520. And his actual main colony was founded in probably Cape Breton around 1522. We don't know how long it lasted, but no one has ever suggested it lasted 38 years. I mean, or 36 years. Like that would be hard to accept. There'd be more. It probably only lasted a few years because there's just so little evidence. In fact, at this point, we have no literal evidence, unless you count the Overton Stone, which most people wouldn't. But I think it's the Overton Stone counts, but that's just
good enough for me.
Yeah. But no, apart from that, there's really has not been any physical evidence found in Nova Scotia to confirm the Fagundes expedition. No, I mean, nobody really denies that it happened, but everyone would love to find physical evidence for it, and so far none has been found.
I was going to say, we have that picture that we talked about before. Now, where is this located?
Halifax Harbor.
Okay.
Downtown Halifax on the waterfront.
Wow.
So this is something that people can visit if anybody wants to go to Halifax downtown and find this monument. It was made out to João Alvares Fagundes and his attempts to start a colony in 1520.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about Fagundes is that everybody says he had a fishing station, but the evidence doesn't actually back that up. It turns out when you go and actually look at the Portuguese documents and his letters of patent from the King of Portugal, what he actually got royal permission to do was to build a soap factory.
Really?
And at the surface of it, you might think, well, that's like, that doesn't make any sense. Who is he selling the soap to? Like the Micmac?
What would he make it from? Because back in the day, it was live soap, and you need animals for live.
When you think it through, though, it turns out to make a lot of sense, because we know the Basques were very active in that area in the Gulf of St. Lawrence at that time. And this is totally, I mean, I'm just not making that up. Like, all the documents support that totally. And the Basques were very big into harvesting walrus ivory in the Gulf of St. Lawrence during this period. And so, as you can imagine, if you're harvesting walrus ivory, you end up with a dead walrus that essentially has a waste product. Mm-hmm. And walruses have a lot of blubber. Cape Breton has a lot of hardwood. What do you need to make soap? You need hardwood both to burn it and for the ashes, for the lye. And you also need animal fat, like blubber from the walruses, which you could probably get almost for free from the Basques who were collecting the walrus ivory. So your raw materials were almost totally free. And you would then ship this end product back to Europe. And what better cargo? I mean, it's not, if you were sending ore over the oceans, you could easily sink, right, in a storm. But soap floats, right? So it was an ideal cargo, like it wouldn't imperil the ship in bad seas to have a cargo of soap.
Yeah, Linda brought up the fact, she said seal oil. Seal oil could also have been used for good soap too. Is there a lot of seals up in that neck of the woods?
Well, they are, but in those days, I don't believe they were actively harvested. I mean, you could have. Certainly.
What about whale byproduct? They were whaling.
Well, the thing is about the whale oil, it was a valuable commodity, and the Basques were definitely harvesting whale oil. So he could have, Fagundes could have purchased whale oil, but I think he, in all likelihood, would have wanted to get blubber for free if he could, because to my knowledge, the Basques were not processing blubber from walruses. I mean, I'm totally speculating here, except for the fact that it is well documented that the Basques were harvesting walrus ivory in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. What they did with the dead carcasses afterwards, probably nothing in all likelihood. I mean, I'm not aware of any documentation about it, but I'm just putting myself in Fagundes' shoes here. Why would he apply to the King of Portugal for the exclusive rights to soap manufacture in Cape Breton, right? To me, it makes a lot of sense when you think it through.
Mm-hmm.
There are wild horses on, is it Sable Island? Sable Island. I read somewhere that these wild horses got there from a wrecked ship, maybe. So would that have been Spanish ships or Portuguese ships that brought horses?
I don't think anyone has pinned down the voyage where the horses arrived. It may have happened more than once, but it is pretty much confirmed that the Portuguese did place livestock of different types on Sable Island at an early period. And actually, not only the Portuguese, even the French and the British, even the New Englanders, it's documented that New Englanders, in fact, did that in order to have provisions prior to the siege of Louisburg. That they had livestock a few seasons ahead of time on Sable Island so that they could provision their fleet for the attack on Louisburg in 1744 or 1745. But so a number of different people. They were both livestock that ended up on Sable Island due to shipwrecks, as well as livestock deliberately put on Sable Island for grazing so that they could be harvested at a later date. The Sable Island was a fascinating place.
Yeah, I didn't know if that's something that somebody asked. This was Catherine asked about doing DNA testing on the horses from that island to find out where they came from, but I don't know.
Right. I mean, another guest on your show may be able to tell you a lot more about that than I do. I sort of only know the basics about it, but it is certainly a fascinating thing. Yeah, sheep were definitely put on Sable Island for that purpose as well. You're right. But Sable Island is now a Parks Canada.
Parks Canada has a whole website. Parks Canada has a whole website dedicated to.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yes, it was. Parks Canada took over as management for those lands.
The National Historic Site. Yeah.
Yeah. So they are trying to have ways now of managing visitors to it. I don't think it'll ever be a big destination like Keji or the Highlands National Park, but they're trying to allow for controlled visitation to Sable Island in the near future. So people who want to go there will have an ability to do so in the coming years. I think Parks Canada is taking care of that.
If somebody wants to see a museum exhibit about Sable Island and the horses that live there, there's one, or used to be one, at the Museum of Natural History in Halifax. I used to visit it with my son. And there's a movie with James Seymour about the wild horses of Sable Island, if somebody wants to look that up. It's a very nice movie. So these horses, I believe, are left alone. So they have to fend for themselves. Even if they get sick, they just have to survive as best they can.
It's a natural wild herd, yeah.
Yes, and people who are allowed to visit, they can't touch the horses and, feed them or mess with them. So,
yeah.
Yes.
I think actually there's a rule you have to stay so far away from them.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah, that would probably knock out any idea. If they're doing that, then doing a DNA testing on them would probably be out of the question then, of course. That's interesting. And that's on Sable Island, you called it?
Sable Island.
Where's that located in reference to, Oak Island or Mahone Bay?
It's about 200 kilometers out to sea from Halifax.
Oh, wow.
It's almost at the edge of the continental shelf. Well, it practically is at the edge of the continental shelf.
Oh, wow.
So what happens is, if you're familiar with the ocean currents, there's the Gulf Stream that runs from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to Iceland, really. And it's much warmer than most of the North Atlantic. So it's actually what keeps Britain fairly warm compared to the continent. But it goes right by Sable Island, the Gulf Stream does. So there's some, it ends up being a warmer place most of the time than you might think, being out there in the North Atlantic because of the heat from the Gulf Stream.
Wow.
There's an enormous amount of wrecked ships around Sable Island. And if somebody wants to know more, I recommend a book called Sable Island Shipwrecks, Disaster and Survival by Lyle Campbell. So it's
that area used to be referred to as the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Yes, over 300 ships are supposedly on the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
Sable Island.
During the 1800s, the British maintained a life-saving station on Sable Island.
Oh, wow.
Right, yeah.
So, it was maintained out of Halifax. So Navy personnel were stationed there to, help anybody who was shipwrecked on Sable Island and eventually get them back to the mainland.
I was just looking out here. There is actually a lot. Oh, my goodness. I was trying to get a picture here.
Of Sable Island or the book?
And they're showing all the shipwrecks. My goodness.
Yep.
There is a lot. This is really interesting. Yeah, so I'll have to do a little research on this one myself. The Maritime Museum .novascotia.ca/sable-shipwrecks-map is where I was looking. That's interesting. Known wrecks since 1583, and there is a lot of them. My goodness. Why, I wonder? Why so many?
The 1583 one was Humphrey Gilbert.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a combination of the winds and the shallow shoals in there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's very shallow. Like, it's a sandbar. Basically, Sable Island itself is a shifting sandbar.
Okay.
it actually moves. Like the maps actually have to continually be redrawn because it keeps moving.
Wow.
Yeah, but all around it, it's very, very shallow and basically like sand everywhere all around it.
Yeah, I'm just going to show this just briefly here. This just kind of gives you an idea here, folks. This is, again, this is the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic website. And this is Sable Island shipwrecks, and it says Nova Scotia since shipwrecks known since 1583. And just look at them. I mean, that's a very little narrow strip of land.
Very narrow, very long.
Wow. Fascinating. That's interesting. I had no idea that even existed until today. I'm glad you brought that up. Wow. And it has horses on it. Wild horses.
Yes, wild horses. Yes.
Wow.
It was a movie with Jane Seymour.
I'm gonna have to watch that now. That's gonna be interesting. I like her. She's one of my favorites actresses.
Some people call them ponies because
yeah.
Right.
I was just going to say that they're referred to as the Sable Island ponies.
Right, but in fact they are horses. They are smaller than they are smaller than the horses we're familiar with. But what people don't realize, or a lot of people don't realize, is back a few hundred years ago, like in medieval times, all horses were smaller than our modern horses. Our modern horses are big, much bigger than. Throughout history, the horses were a lot smaller than our modern horses who have been. I mean, the breeding of horses for size to make them large didn't really start until the 1800s, or maybe 1700s, maybe late 1700s.
Anyway, people were smaller too because they just didn't have the nutrition.
But the horses
and they probably couldn't afford to feed horses expensive feed, 500 years ago. So. Well,
that's true, but that's not why they were small. They weren't underfed. They just. Genetically were smaller. But anyway, yeah. So they're sort of the horses of Sable Island are kind of like a historical artifact in themselves, by the fact that they are small, as all horses were small back several hundred years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So Terry, I want to ask you about two Portuguese explorers who were brothers. They were the Corte-Real brothers. They were also from Azores. And I believe they were Gaspar and Miguel, and you mentioned in the pre-show that they had a third brother as well. So did the Corte-Real brothers reach Nova Scotia in the 1500s, do you think?
Yeah, they probably did because we know they explored Atlantic Canada, and the maps show the area north of here, actually, like around the Newfoundland and so on, as the land of Corte-Real. Because both brothers were lost at sea on separate voyages. I mean, you had Gaspar first lost at sea, and then the next year his brother Miguel went out to try to find him, but he was lost as well. And so when the third brother, the next season, was going to go out and try to find his brothers, the King of Portugal said, no, it'd be too much for your poor father if you were also lost at sea. So I forbid you by royal decree from going out after them. But it's quite a story. There's a lot of legends about it. Some legends say that they tried to capture some Mi'kmaq slaves and were overpowered and there's various legends about what fate they may have undergone. And there's also the Dighton Rock in Dighton, Massachusetts.
Yes. I hoped you would say that.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of it here with a gentleman sitting on. I believe this is it. Tell me, is that the right one?
That's the right one.
Okay,
yeah.
Good.
So I'm not sure this one doesn't highlight it very well, but some other ones, other tracings of these scratches might even scratch out the word Miguel Corte-Real. On how.
And what's interesting is that the Corte-Reals came to Atlantic Canada around 1500, 1502, but the inscription on the Dighton Rock, presumably by Miguel Corte-Real, is from 1511. So it sounds like they were here for 11 years.
Wow.
That's a long time to sail up and down the coast.
Now,
As you
where is
can
this
imagine,
located?
for a stone like this, there's a lot of controversy about how to interpret these
Yes,
scratches,
of
because
course.
clearly there's a lot of markings that are most likely of Native American origin, especially the ones on the far left in this image. You can find very similar examples of the people with the face and the three dots in the head. Very similar iconography in Vermont and other places like that. So it's thought that if there truly are European markings on this stone, that they're also, the stone was also used by Native Americans as well. And
Yes.
some people think that it's entirely Native American. So, there is a controversy about it, but there's a whole museum devoted to this, the Dighton Rock Museum. And originally this stone was located exposed to the tides and the weather, but the Dighton Rock Museum has actually been able to take the rock out of that spot and put it inside a museum. And so now
Wow.
it's protected and you can visit it in comfort, indoors. And there's lots of, I really recommend a visit to the Dighton Rock Museum in Dighton, Massachusetts.
Yeah, I'm sure we have some Americans in our audience who can make that trip. So put that on your bucket list, folks. Dighton Rock, Massachusetts, recommended by Terry.
Yeah, definitely. I love this stuff. I tell you what, and that's one of the beauties, and I've mentioned this before, but that's one of the beauties of doing this particular show and having such wonderful guests on like you, Terry, and Alessandra, is because you bring so much more to, and somebody mentioned it in our chat earlier, you bring so much more out to light that we did not learn in school, or maybe we were told a little bit about it at school, but back then I really didn't care. Now I do. I really have a hunger for this because you're opening my eyes to so much information that I had no idea existed. And this is truly fascinating. And I know that that's why we have the people that are hanging out today to hear about this, because it really is information that we never knew before. This is fascinating. And this is in Massachusetts. Where is it again? I'm going to write this down again. I'm sorry.
Dighton.
Okay. Dighton, Massachusetts. Okay. Yeah, I'm not that far. I mean, I could go up there and, it's a few hour drive, but oh, I see somebody okay, you got a link for it there. Okay. We'll put that on we'll get that on the webpage, and let me see if I can copy this. Whoops. All right. Whoop. Uh-oh. Hope I didn't do that on. There we go. Okay. I was afraid I just put I copied everything and posted all of it on there. There's a lot of information. Okay. Wow, this has been fascinating. I tell you, this is. I knew that having you on, Terry, was going to be a very entertaining and information filled show, and it certainly has been. You've got so much research that extends so far, and I have to ask you, just simply because of the whole thing with Oak Island. Yes, you've been out there a few times, and we're getting ready to wrap up here. But so I'm going to throw this one out there. I know it's going to, I hate when people ask these questions, but so Oak Island, what do you think it was used for? Do you think it was some sort of a place for treasure? Do you think it was a place, just a stopping point? Was it a port to repair ships? What's your thinking on that?
Well, I'm a scientist, and for me, it's personally very important to be evidence-based.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm happy to look at evidence that I find or people bring to my attention and try to analyze it and even speculate a little bit about that evidence if necessary. Try to avoid doing that, but sometimes it's not avoidable. Mm-hmm. But I try not to go too far from what the evidence is actually saying. Right now, I just don't think the evidence is saying enough about the bigger questions of Oak Island. It's clear to me that something of magnitude was happening prior to the colonization period. I mean, on the show, they frequently talk about 1795 as the traditional date when the search began on Oak Island.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In fact, history says that fishermen had been granted the use of Oak Island as early as 1750. And so from 1750 onwards, we can expect to find relics of colonial activity on Oak Island. So for me, the date is 1750. Stuff that's found before 1750 would be part of the mystery, if you will. Stuff that dates post 1750 is still part of the colonial period. And it could have been fishing, it could have been, wood harvesting, it could have been agriculture, maybe even harvesting the gypsum. Could have been almost anything, really. It's not of super interest, like docks and so on, that date to the 1760s. But prior to 1750, we don't have any real strong history to fall back on. So I like to look at any artifacts that date from that earlier period, like the road or the shot, like the cannon shot that was found. Plenty of other fascinating artifacts that you can, the wood that's been carbon dated, and analyze those artifacts. But they just aren't leading us towards any strong hypotheses yet as to what was the overall reason for any of this. What was the why and who was doing this and why were they doing it? So I can't really, my ability to speculate is just too far out on the limb at this point based on the available evidence. I have to stick to speculating only a little bit beyond
the science.
Mystery continues.
Yeah, absolutely. It truly does. And that was like, somebody had brought it up in the chat too. I noticed that, Ian Spooner, when they found the stone platform, it was a big stone paved area that they found on the north side of Nolan's Peninsula. And then sandwiched between two of the rocks that were in there was a piece of wood that Dr. Ian Spooner had taken out. They had it tested to be around 1220. So that would indicate somewhere around that time, that particular platform was created. Again, a very extensive thing that was done, would have taken a lot of man hours to do and a lot of resources and a lot of, so, but why? Why was that? And why was that date somewhere in that time frame? Again, it's...
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And it is a mystery. One of the things you have to be very careful about, though, is carbon dates that result from samples that have been exposed to a marine environment. In the archaeological community, they have a lot of trouble working with that kind of a sample because marine oils can contaminate and shift the date. Even if you treat the sample, to try to counteract that effect, it usually can't be totally effective. So
I see. I did not know that.
C14 dates from artifacts that have been exposed to a marine environment are not as definitive as they would be if they were found in, let's say, a tomb or something, where it's been isolated.
Right.
So you have to be a little careful. Now that date in particular, though, that one of the stick in the platform, 1250 or whatever it was just one end of the spectrum. That date went back as far as the 1100s as well. So we know the Norse were active in Canada in the 1100s. So it's not completely impossible for it to have been a relic of the Norse. Now, I'm not saying I advocate that or I'm pushing for it, but it's within the realm of possibility, even though maybe the chances are not that high, but can't rule it out yet.
Wow. I know. Well, still definitely more mysteries out there to be uncovered. And again, and there's so many people that have so many different theories, but like Rick says, a theory is just a theory until you can hold it in your hands. And there are many, that people have talked about for Oak Island. Well, hopefully we'll see you back out there and giving more of your expertise on things in the future. I know that if you are, we can't talk about that, but I certainly hope to see you back out there. And I really appreciate your coming on today. We're at our 2-hour mark, and I don't like to keep everybody longer than that for the show. And I really, really appreciate your coming on. This has been fun and very informative, and I'm sure that we kept the audience for quite a long time throughout this, so they were also enthralled with the information that was brought out today. So thank you very much for that, Terry. Appreciate it.
Okay, so in closing, let me just say that I am the Atlantic Canada rep for NERA, the New England Antiquities Research Association. And on our website, we do have the Overton Stone document, if people have heard about it. So we should put a link to the Overton Stone document on the NERA website for people to access, because all the things we talked about today, or a lot of them anyway, are given in more detail in that Overton Stone document.
Okay, and what is that? What's that website?
It's just NERA.org.
NERA.org.
Yeah.
Jeff, I sent you a link to Terry's paper.
Okay.
You might be able to copy and paste from there.
Let's see. Naval enlisted. Oh, no, I got the wrong one. That's not it. NERA.org.
Yep. And by the way, folks, if you're interested in joining NERA, we love to analyze these topics. We've got journals and websites and conferences. We're having a conference this May in Connecticut. So if you're interested in this type of stuff, NERA is the place for you. We'd love to have more members.
All right, great. The one I brought up, it says Naval Enlisted Reserve Association. So I don't know if I have that right.
No, that's not right.
No, NERA.org. That's what I brought up.
NEARA. Sorry, did I say that wrong? NEARA.org. NEARA.
Oh, okay, there it is. All right, yep, that's it.
My apologies.
Okay, so I'll definitely let me post that real quick in the chat. There we go. There, I've got it up in the chat now, and I'll put that also in the description of the show as well. And then, yes, the one that you sent me also, Alessandra, I'll put in there so we can get that as linked as for everybody to get some information, because this is really cool stuff. It really is. All right. Well, thank you so much, Terry, for being here with us today. Alessandra and Tom Burns, thank you so much for co-hosting. You guys are wonderful. I had some great questions and good insights, and I do appreciate it so very much. Thank you. Hey, everybody, for joining us here today. Thank you for being here. And if you'd like to help support the show, you can do so by going out to patreon.com. And my channel there is jfree906 if you'd like to help support us. And of course, give us a thumbs up and click on that subscribe button. And then you'll be notified right away when we have new content that we're coming out with. So that's about wraps it up for today. Have a good rest of your weekend. Tomorrow, we do have our Beyond Our World episode. We're going to be talking about Can't Touch This. What exactly does that mean? We're going to be talking about some quantum physics type stuff on the show tomorrow. So you want to check that out. That's 7 o'clock tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern. And don't forget, tonight's spring forward, right? So we got to turn our clocks ahead 1 hour. Pardon me? For us, it's tonight.
Tomorrow morning.
Yeah, tomorrow morning. Yeah, after midnight tonight. So I do it before I go to bed, because if I don't, I'll never. Yeah, I'll wake up in the morning. I've forgotten all about it. So, so 7 o'clock p.m. Eastern time tomorrow for that episode Beyond Our World, and we'll be back here Wednesday night at 7:30 for the next episode of The Curse of Oak Island. Have a great rest of your weekend, folks. We'll see you here tomorrow. Bye-bye now.